Imagery is a writing technique that uses vivid descriptions that appeal to our senses. The author uses language to recreate sensory impressions of actual experiences. The idea is that imagery helps a reader experience a story rather than just reading it. There are a couple of important points I want to clarify about imagery. These are things that students have often found confusing in the past. The first important point is that imagery involves vivid description, not just basic description. Let's look at an example of what this means. Here are two descriptions of the same event. The first reads, "As we approached the carnival, I smelled funnel cakes and chicken and waffles." The second reads, "We approached the carnival and I could smell the hot, greasy scents of frying funnel cakes and powdery sweet waffles with crisp, juicy fried chicken." Think about your senses, sight, taste, smell. Which version of the description appeals more to your senses? Which one helps you imagine the experience more? The version on the left states the foods that the author smells, but the version on the right really describes them. Look at all the adjectives used to describe the smells in the version on the right. Words like greasy, powdery sweet, crispy, juicy. This helps the reader experience the smells and images the author is trying to convey. A basic description, like the one on the left, is sort of like a clip art version of a picture. It's fine, and you get the idea. But by including imagery, like the version on the right, you get a vivid, detailed view that pulls your senses into the story. Imagery might be easy to recognize, but it can be very difficult to write. If you are able to master writing imagery, it can make your stories and persuasive writing much more appealing to audiences and develop a stronger effect on your readers. So how do you write imagery? By mastering language techniques. Comparison techniques like similes and metaphors often contribute to imagery, as well as word choice like vivid adjectives and strong verbs. In turn, vivid imagery can also help develop a particular tone or mood in your writing. The second important point to remember is that imagery isn't just visual. Many people hear the name imagery and hear image and think it must only apply to visual things, but that's not true. Imagery appeals to all of our five senses. Do you know what they are? Sight is the first, but there's also taste, touch, sound or hearing, and smell. Now let's look at some examples of the 5 different types of imagery from one of my favorite stories, Harry Potter. The first type of imagery is the most well-known, visual or sight imagery. This describes images that we see, what a character or a setting looks like. The old phrase, "it paints a picture in the reader's head," really applies to visual imagery. Let's look at a Harry Potter example from Harry's first experience with a weird magical plant, mandrakes. Instead of roots, a small, muddy, and extremely ugly baby popped out of the earth. The leaves were growing right out of his head. He had pale green mold skin and was clearly bawling at the top of his lungs. Notice the details in the word choice adjectives to describe the mandrakes. Words like extremely ugly, small, muddy, the pale green skin. Also the strong verbs popped and especially bawling. It's much more vivid action than just crying, so we get a better idea of the mandrake's actions as well. The second type of imagery is auditory or hearing imagery. This imagery appeals to our sense of sound. Let's look at an example that involves our Harry Potter heroes sneaking out of their dorms after hours and running into an unfortunate incident with an old suit of armor. "This way," Harry mouthed to the others, and petrified, they began to creep down a long gallery full of suits of armor. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Neville suddenly let out a frightened squeak and tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armor. The clanging and crashing were enough to wake the whole castle. "Run!" Harry yelled, and the 4 of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. The verbs in this passage are integral in creating the auditory imagery. Words like tripped, toppled, clanging, crashing, yelled, and sprinted all create the sense of noise, confusion, and panic that the kids experience as they try to avoid getting caught out of their rooms at night. Fun fact, Did you know that our sense of smell is actually the strongest of our five senses? It's true. It's also the one most closely tied to our memories. Olfactory imagery appeals to our sense of smell. Let's look at a smelly description of the greenhouse at Hogwarts. Harry caught a whiff of damp earth and fertilizer mingling with the heavy perfume of some giant umbrella-sized flowers dangling from the ceiling. Adjectives like damp earth and heavy perfume, as well as the metaphor comparing the flower size to umbrellas, all appeal to certain smells we may know. Also, the verb mingling really helps to create a sense of multiple smells all coming at the characters at once. Gustatory imagery appeals to our sense of taste. This is my personal favorite type of imagery because I love different types of food. But this imagery can also be really rough if you're drinking something as nasty as Polyjuice potion. The potion hissed loudly like a bottling kettle and frothed madly. A second later, it had turned a sick sort of yellow. Pinching his nose, Harry drank the potion down in 2 large gulps. It tasted like overcooked cabbage. Immediately, his insides started writhing as though he'd just swallowed live snakes. Doubled up, he wondered whether he was going to be sick. Then a burning sensation spread rapidly from his stomach to the very ends of his fingers and toes. Describing the potion as sick, writhing, and burning all create a disgusting gustatory image. Similes comparing the potion taste and texture to snakes and burned cabbage add to the revolting experience. Also, the verb pinching his nose when Harry first drinks it creates a sense immediately that this potion is not going to taste pleasant. Pinching your nose and cutting off your sense of smell is supposed to help lessen the taste of something, since our senses of smell and taste are closely linked. So by using that action, the author signals to the reader that this gustatory imagery is going to be nasty. Tactile imagery appeals to our sense of touch. It involves the physical feeling of things, a breeze in our hair, a loved one holding our hand, the pain from a cut or a burn. Let's check out some fun tactile imagery from Harry's first flying lesson. Harry ignored her. Blood was pounding in his ears. He mounted the broom and kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared. Air rushed through his hair, and his robes whipped out behind him. And in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. He leaned forward and grasped the broom tightly in both hands, and it shot toward Malfoy like a javelin. Malfoy only just got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about-face and held the broom steady. In this scene, mean old Draco Malfoy has just stolen Neville's Remembrall, and Harry races after him on a broomstick to get it back. There are loads of examples of different tactile imagery in this excerpt, and most of it involves strong verbs. Blood pounding in Harry's ears because he's so angry. Kicking hard against the ground to take flight. Air rushing through his hair. His robes whipping behind him. Grasping the broom tightly. These verbs all suggest actions and physical sensations of this first flying experience. These last 2 types of imagery aren't very well known, and they're actually under dispute because they extend beyond our 5 senses. The first type is called kinesthetic imagery. This type of imagery deals with movement or actions of objects or people. You saw some examples of this in the tactile imagery of Harry Potter flying, the wind rushing through his hair as the broom flew up into the air. Kinesthetic imagery helps a reader create an accurate visual image of the scene by describing the actions and movement. The second type, organic imagery, is the most difficult form of imagery to write. Organic imagery involves creating a specific feeling or emotion within a reader. When a piece of writing makes a reader feel a particular emotion, that's an example of organic imagery. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of what imagery is, how to write it, and how to break it down to understand its effects. Imagery is a great way to make your own writing more interesting and vivid, and to better share your feelings and experiences with your readers.